Found my husband's second phone. What I saw destroyed me. Those 8 words changed my entire life at 55 years old. I'm talking about the kind of discovery that makes you question every single moment of your marriage, every conversation, every I love you, every anniversary dinner. The kind of truth that doesn't just break your heart, it shatters your entire sense of reality. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 60 years old and I live in Seattle, Washington. I spent 30 years working as a librarian at the Seattle Public Library, and now I'm retired, spending my days volunteering at a local animal shelter and spoiling my 3 grandchildren. I have a small craftsman house in the Ballard neighborhood, a rescue dog named Pepper, and for the first time in decades, I wake up every morning without that heavy feeling in my chest that something isn't quite right. But 5 years ago, I was a completely different woman. I was married to a man I thought I knew inside and out after 24 years together. I was living what I believed was a good life. Not perfect, but solid, stable, the kind of marriage that our friends admired. And then one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, while cleaning out Robert's car, I found a phone hidden under the driver's seat. Not his phone. A second phone. And what I discovered on that phone didn't just reveal an affair. It revealed an entire second life that had been running parallel to ours for years. Before I tell you this story, and I promise you it gets much more complicated than you might imagine, I need to ask you something. Can you leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from? Are you someone who's had that gut feeling that something isn't right? Have you ever found something that made you question everything? Wherever you are in your journey, know that you're not alone. And if my story helps even one person trust their instincts, then sharing this painful chapter of my life will have been worth it. Please hit that like button and subscribe, because every subscription tells me that someone out there needs to hear that it's possible to rebuild your life, even when you discover that everything you believed was a lie. The story I'm about to share spans 24 years of marriage, but really, it's about the moment when ignorance ended and truth began. It's about what happens when you finally see what's been hidden in plain sight all along. And it's about finding out that the person sleeping next to you every night has been living a completely different existence that you knew nothing about. That phone I found wasn't just evidence of betrayal. It was proof that I'd been married to a stranger. I met Robert when I was 30 years old at the Pacific Northwest Library Association conference in Portland. I was already established in my career, working as a reference librarian at the Seattle Public Library's Central Branch. I loved my job, loved helping people find information, loved the quiet satisfaction of solving research puzzles. I wasn't actively looking for a relationship. I'd had a few boyfriends in my 20s, but nothing serious. I was content with my life, my books, my small apartment in Capitol Hill. Robert was giving a presentation on digital archiving systems. He worked for a tech company that specialized in library management software. I remember sitting in that conference room, watching him present with such confidence and knowledge, answering technical questions with ease. He was 42, 12 years older than me, with graying temples and this distinguished professor look that I found incredibly attractive. When he made a joke about the Dewey Decimal System, I laughed, and he noticed me in the audience. After his presentation, he approached me at the coffee station. "I saw you laughing at my terrible librarian humor," he said, smiling. "Either you're very polite, or you actually understood the reference." We talked for 20 minutes about library science, technology, our shared love of first edition books. He had this way of making me feel like my opinions mattered, like my work was important. Most men I'd dated seemed vaguely amused by my career as a librarian, making jokes about shushing people. Robert talked about it like it was a noble profession. We exchanged business cards, and he called me the following week. Our first date was at Elliott Bay Book Company, browsing the stacks, then dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant in Pioneer Square. He was a perfect gentleman, asking thoughtful questions about my family, my interests, my dreams. I told him I'd always wanted to travel to Europe, to see the great libraries of the world. He'd been to Paris, London, Rome. He promised to take me someday. The courtship was careful, mature. We were both adults, not impulsive 20-somethings. Robert had been married before, divorced for 5 years. No children from that marriage, which he said had ended amicably. They'd wanted different things, grown apart, the usual story. He was open about it, didn't speak badly about his ex-wife, which I appreciated. It showed maturity, emotional intelligence. We dated for a year before he proposed. It was at the Japanese garden in the Washington Park Arboretum on a spring afternoon when the cherry blossoms were in full bloom. He got down on one knee and said, "Margaret, you're the intellectual partner I've been searching for my entire life. Will you marry me?" The ring was beautiful, an antique setting with a sapphire, my birthstone. He'd paid attention to that detail. Our wedding was small, elegant, at the Rainier Club. My parents were there, thrilled that I'd finally found someone. My father, who'd been skeptical of my staying single into my 30s, shook Robert's hand and said, "You're getting a wonderful woman. Take care of her." Robert promised he would. My mother cried happy tears. My younger sister was my maid of honor, whispering to me before I walked down the aisle, "He seems perfect, Maggie. You're so lucky." The early years of marriage were good. Robert traveled frequently for work, consulting with libraries across the country about their digital systems. Sometimes he'd be gone for a week at a time. I didn't mind. I had my own career, my own friends, my own routines. When he came home, he'd bring me gifts, books from used bookstores in whatever city he'd visited, little tokens that showed he was thinking of me. We bought a house in Ballard, a beautiful 1920s craftsman with built-in bookshelves and a reading nook. I decorated it carefully, choosing furniture from antique stores, hanging art from local galleries. Robert worked from a home office when he wasn't traveling, and I'd come home from the library to find him at his desk, surrounded by papers and computer screens, always working on some important project. We had a daughter, Claire, when I was 33, and a son, James, 2 years later. Robert was a good father, at least when he was home. He'd read bedtime stories, help with homework, attend school plays and soccer games when his travel schedule allowed. The kids adored him, looked forward to his return from business trips when he'd bring them souvenirs and tell them stories about his adventures. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Work, family, the house, the neighborhood. We had dinner parties with other couples, joined the PTA, took family vacations to the San Juan Islands every summer. From the outside, we looked like the model family, educated, cultured, stable. Robert's career was thriving. My career was steady. The kids were doing well in school. We attended the symphony, supported local theater, volunteered at the Children's Museum. But there were small things, even then, that didn't quite add up. Phone calls he'd take in another room, credit card charges I didn't recognize, business trips that seemed longer than necessary. When I'd ask about these things, Robert always had explanations that sounded reasonable. The phone calls were work-related, confidential client information. The charges were for business expenses he'd forgotten to mention. The trips got extended because of last-minute client needs. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, the father of my children, a respected professional in his field. And I was busy with my own life, my own responsibilities. I didn't have time to be suspicious, to question every little inconsistency. That's what I tell myself now anyway. The truth is, I didn't want to see what was right in front of me. The first real moment of doubt came when Claire was about 5 years old. Robert had been away on a business trip to San Francisco for what was supposed to be 3 days. On the third evening, I called his hotel room to say goodnight, and the front desk told me he'd checked out that morning. When he finally answered his cell phone hours later, he sounded flustered. He explained that the conference had ended early and he'd decided to extend his trip to visit an old college friend who lived in the area. He'd forgotten to mention it because it was a last-minute decision. It was a reasonable explanation. But something about the way he said it, the slight hesitation in his voice, made my stomach twist. I asked why he hadn't called to let me know. He got defensive, said he didn't realize he needed to check in like a teenager, that he was allowed to see old friends without my permission. I apologized, feeling guilty for questioning him. I was being paranoid, controlling, exactly the kind of wife I'd promised myself I wouldn't be. The credit card statements became another source of confusion. I handled most of our household finances, paid the bills, managed our budget. I'd noticed charges from restaurants in cities where Robert said he'd been working, but the amount seemed high for solo business meals. $200 at a steakhouse? $300 at a wine bar? When I asked about them, he'd explain they were client dinners, that entertaining clients was part of his job, that these expenses would be reimbursed by his company. But the reimbursements never seemed to match up with the charges. I'd find receipts in his jacket pockets, dinner for two at romantic restaurants, wine bottles that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. Once, I found a receipt from a florist in Portland for a bouquet that I'd never received. When I mentioned it, Robert looked confused for a moment, then laughed and said it was for his assistant's birthday, that he'd expensed it as a business gift. His assistant, a woman named Jennifer that I'd never met, never spoken to, who seemed to require a lot of his attention. He'd take calls from her at odd hours, step out of family dinners to handle urgent work matters, spend hours on his computer emailing about critical projects. When I suggested meeting her at a company function, Robert said the firm didn't really do social events, that it wasn't that kind of workplace. The travel intensified as the kids got older. What had been 1 week a month became 2 weeks, then 3. Robert was always apologetic, always promising it would calm down soon, always bringing home expensive gifts to make up for his absence. A pearl necklace from New York, designer handbag from Los Angeles, cashmere scarf from Boston. I wore these gifts and felt strange, like I was being paid off for something, though I couldn't have said what. My friends started making comments. At a PTA meeting, another mother mentioned seeing Robert having dinner at a nice restaurant downtown when he was supposed to be in Chicago. I defended him, said she must have been mistaken, that Robert would have told me if his plans changed. She looked at me with pity and changed the subject. I went home that night and asked Robert about it. He was irritated, said his trip had been canceled at the last minute, that he'd had dinner with a local client instead, that he didn't appreciate me interrogating him based on gossip. I started to feel like I was going crazy. Every instinct told me something was wrong, but every time I raised a concern, Robert had an explanation that made me feel foolish for doubting him. He'd accuse me of being insecure, of not trusting him, of letting my imagination run wild. He'd remind me of everything he provided for our family, the beautiful house, the private schools for the kids, the comfortable life we had because of his hard work and travel. And I'd back down. I'd apologize. I'd tell myself I was being paranoid, that successful marriages required trust, that I was lucky to have a husband who worked so hard for our family. My mother's voice was in my head too, reminding me that men needed to be given space, that being a good wife meant not being clingy or suspicious, that questioning your husband too much could drive him away. The technology became another barrier. Robert was always upgrading his phones, getting the latest models, saying he needed them for work. He kept his devices password protected, which he said was necessary for client confidentiality. If his phone buzzed during dinner, he'd grab it quickly, glance at the screen, and either ignore it or excuse himself to take the call. When I once picked up his phone to hand it to him, he nearly knocked over his coffee rushing to take it from me. There were other small things that accumulated over the years. Unexplained charges at hotels in cities where he claimed to be staying with clients. Frequent flyer miles that didn't match up with the trips he told me about. A lingering perfume smell on his jacket that wasn't mine. Lipstick on his collar, once that he said, came from an overly affectionate client at a holiday party. I started keeping a mental list of inconsistencies, though I never wrote them down. That felt too much like I was building a case against my own husband, which seemed both disloyal and paranoid. Instead, I just noticed things, filed them away, tried to ignore the growing pit of anxiety in my stomach every time Robert packed for another trip. Our sex life had become sporadic, mechanical. Robert blamed his travel schedule, his stress at work, his age. He was in his 50s now, he'd say. It was natural that things slowed down. When we did have sex, he seemed distant, going through the motions. Once he called me by the wrong name during, then claimed he'd said nothing at all, that I'd misheard him. I lay awake that whole night, replaying the moment, wondering if I really had imagined it. By the time I was in my early 50s, I'd essentially stopped questioning anything. It was easier that way. I focused on my work at the library, on the kids as they went through high school, on maintaining our home and our social life. Robert and I were like two polite strangers sharing a house, coordinating schedules, discussing logistics, but rarely connecting on any deeper level. I told myself this was normal, that all long marriages went through phases like this. That passion faded and was replaced by comfortable companionship. I threw myself into being the perfect mother because I couldn't be the perfect wife. If I couldn't understand my husband, at least I could understand my children. Claire was preparing for college applications. James was deep into his high school baseball obsession. I told myself this phase was temporary, that once the kids left home, Robert and I would reconnect, rediscover each other, travel to those European libraries he'd promised me decades ago. But there was this one moment that should have woken me up years before that phone ever appeared. Claire was 17, getting ready for her senior prom. She was in her bedroom trying on the dress we'd spent weeks finding, and I was helping her with her hair. Out of nowhere, she asked me a question that stopped my hands mid-braid. "Mom, do you think Dad loves you?" The silence that followed felt like falling. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, hear James playing video games downstairs, hear my own heartbeat getting faster. "Of course he does," I finally said. "Why would you ask that?" She looked at me in the mirror, and I saw something in her eyes that scared me. Pity. My 17-year-old daughter was looking at me with pity. "He's never here, Mom, and when he is here, he's not really here. He's always on his phone or in his office. I don't remember the last time I saw him kiss you or even hold your hand. My friends' parents aren't like that." I tried to explain about long marriages, about how romance changes, about how your father works hard for this family. But she just nodded and changed the subject, and I knew she didn't believe me. Worse, I wasn't sure I believed me either. That conversation haunted me for weeks. I started watching Robert more carefully, looking for signs of affection that I could point to as evidence that we were still a real couple. But there was nothing. We moved around each other like choreographed dancers who'd perfected the steps, but forgotten why we were dancing. "Good morning. How was your day?" "Dinner's ready. I'll be traveling Thursday. The kids need new shoes." "Did you pay the electric bill?" Then Robert's father died, and I saw a side of him I'd forgotten existed. We flew to Minneapolis for the funeral, just the two of us since the kids had exams. On the plane, Robert reached for my hand. At the funeral home, he cried on my shoulder. That night in the hotel, we made love for the first time in months, and it felt almost like it used to, vulnerable and real. For 3 days, I had my husband back. But the moment we returned to Seattle, he disappeared again. Back into his office, back to his phone, back to his trips. It was like those 3 days had been a brief intermission in whatever performance we were both giving. I wondered if that's what our whole marriage had become. A performance for the kids, for the neighbors, for his colleagues, for my family. Everyone thought we were the ideal couple. No one knew that some nights I'd lie awake listening to Robert breathe beside me and feel completely alone. The financial situation started bothering me more too. Robert had always handled the investments, the retirement accounts, the big picture money stuff. I paid the household bills, but he controlled everything else. When I'd ask about our retirement savings or our investment portfolio, he'd give me vague reassurances. "We're fine. I've got it handled. Don't worry about it. Trust me." But I did worry. I was approaching my mid-50s, thinking about retirement from the library in another 10 years. What exactly were we retiring on? How much did we have saved? Robert kept saying we were in great shape, but he never showed me actual numbers. When I pushed, he'd get irritated, accuse me of not trusting his financial management, remind me that his career had paid for everything we had. One afternoon, I was at the bank depositing my paycheck when the teller made a comment about our savings account being lower than usual. I didn't even know what she was talking about. I asked to see the account balance. It was nearly empty. We'd had over $50,000 in that account last time I checked. Now there was less than $3,000. I went home shaking. When Robert got back from wherever he'd been that day, I confronted him about it. He had this moment, just a split second, where his face went blank. Then he recovered, explained that he'd moved money around for tax purposes, that it was all part of a larger investment strategy, that I wouldn't understand the details, but he'd replace that money with higher yield investments. He pulled up some account on his laptop, showed me numbers that meant nothing to me, assured me everything was fine. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too terrifying. The alternative meant our entire financial foundation might be built on lies, that the security I thought we had might not exist, that I might have to start over at 54 years old with nothing. Around this time, something else happened that I didn't fully understand until much later. A woman called the house asking for Robert. When I said he wasn't home, she asked if this was Margaret. I said yes. There was a long pause, and then she said, "I think we need to talk." Before I could respond, she hung up. When I told Robert about the call that evening, his reaction was immediate and intense. What did she say? What did she want? Did you recognize her voice? I'd never seen him that agitated. I said I didn't know who she was, that she'd hung up before saying anything else. Robert paced the kitchen, ran his hands through his hair, finally said it was probably one of his clients having some kind of breakdown, that some people got overly attached to their consultants, that he'd handle it, but that woman never called back. And Robert started checking caller ID obsessively after that, screening every call before answering. Something had shifted. He was more careful now, more guarded. Whatever that phone call was about, it had rattled him badly. Looking back now, I can see how close I came to uncovering everything right then. That woman was trying to tell me something, but I was too scared, too invested in maintaining the illusion of my marriage, too afraid of what the truth might cost me. The year I turned 55, everything started unraveling faster. James had left for college in California, joining his sister who was already finishing her senior year. The house felt enormous and empty. Just me and Robert, except Robert was barely there. He'd increased his travel schedule again, now gone sometimes 3 weeks out of 4. I rattled around in our Ballard Craftsman like a ghost haunting her own life. I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to see. Robert had become sloppy, or maybe he just didn't care anymore about hiding things. I'd find restaurant receipts in his pockets for places in Seattle on nights he claimed to be in other cities. Hotel key cards from local hotels when he supposedly hadn't left town. Once, I found a woman's earring in his car, a delicate gold hoop that definitely wasn't mine. When I asked about it, he barely looked up from his laptop. Must have been from one of his colleagues who he'd given a ride to. The technology had evolved too. Robert now had multiple devices. His work laptop, his personal laptop, a tablet, his phone, sometimes what he called his backup phone. All password protected, all guarded like they contained nuclear codes. If I walked into his office while he was working, he'd immediately minimize whatever was on his screen. If his phone buzzed while he was in the shower, he'd come running out, dripping wet, to check it. My friends had stopped being subtle. At book club, after a few glasses of wine, my friend Patricia just came out and said it. "Maggie, honey, we're worried about you. Robert's behavior isn't normal. The constant travel, the secrecy with his phone. Have you considered that he might be having an affair?" The other women nodded in agreement. I felt my face burning with humiliation and anger. How dare they talk about my marriage like it was their business? But after I got home that night, I sat in my car in the driveway for an hour, crying. Because they were right. They were all right. I knew it, had known it for years, but acknowledging it out loud meant I'd have to do something about it. And I was terrified. Terrified of being alone at 55. Terrified of losing the life I'd built. Terrified of what I'd find if I looked too closely. That's when I started having panic attacks. The first one hit me at work, in the middle of helping a patron find books on gardening. Suddenly I couldn't breathe, my heart was racing, I thought I was dying. My colleague drove me to the emergency room. The doctor said it was anxiety, prescribed medication, suggested therapy. Robert was traveling when it happened. When I called to tell him, he sounded annoyed that I'd bothered him about it. The therapy sessions opened something up in me. Dr. Chen, my therapist, asked questions that nobody else had asked. Why did I think I deserved to be treated this way? What was I afraid would happen if I confronted Robert? What was I modeling for my children about relationships? That last question hit me like a punch to the gut. Claire's prom night question echoed in my head. Do you think Dad loves you? I started preparing myself, though I didn't know what I was preparing for. I opened my own checking account that Robert didn't have access to. I started directing my paycheck there. I made copies of our financial documents when I could find them. I researched divorce lawyers, though I couldn't quite bring myself to call one. I was building an escape route without admitting that's what I was doing. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. It was March, one of those gray Seattle days where the rain never quite starts but never quite stops either. Robert had been home for 3 days, which was unusual. He seemed distracted, constantly on his phone, leaving the room to take calls. On Tuesday morning, he left for what he said was a meeting downtown. His car was still in the driveway when I got home from the library that afternoon. I decided to clean it out. We'd been meaning to for weeks. It was full of coffee cups, fast food bags, papers from his briefcase. I started in the back seat gathering trash. Then I moved to the front, opened the console, found more receipts, some loose change. That's when I reached under the driver's seat to grab a coffee cup that had rolled underneath. My hand touched something hard and rectangular. I pulled it out, confused for a moment about what I was holding. A phone, but not Robert's phone. His phone was the latest iPhone with a black case. This was an older model Android with a plain gray case. I turned it on. It wasn't password protected. The home screen loaded and my hands started shaking. There were apps I recognized. Text messages, photos, email. My brain was screaming at me not to look, not to open anything, to just put it back where I found it and pretend I'd never seen it. But my hands weren't listening to my brain. They were opening the photo gallery. The first photo was of Robert with a woman I'd never seen before. They were at a restaurant, dressed up, his arm around her shoulders. She was younger than me, maybe 40, with long dark hair. They looked happy, comfortable together. I scrolled. More photos of them together. At a beach? In front of the Space Needle. In what looked like a hotel room. In that hotel room, doing things I couldn't keep looking at. I thought I might throw up. I got out of the car, stood in our driveway, rain starting to fall now, holding this phone like it was a live grenade. I should have stopped there. I should have confronted Robert right then. But I didn't. I went inside, locked myself in the bathroom, and kept looking. The text messages were worse than the photos. There were multiple conversations with multiple women. Not just one affair, not just two. I counted at least 5 different women, all active conversations, some from that very day. The messages were intimate, sexual, romantic. He was telling all of them the same things. That they were special, that he loved them, that his wife didn't understand him, that he was planning to leave me soon. There were emails, too. Correspondence about money, about gifts he'd bought them, about trips they'd taken together. I found emails about an apartment he was apparently renting in Bellevue. An apartment I knew nothing about. Emails about credit cards in his name that I didn't know existed. Email confirmations for flights and hotels and cities he'd supposedly been traveling to for work. But the hotel names didn't match the ones he'd told me. I don't know how long I sat on that bathroom floor, scrolling through this other life my husband had been living. The bathroom tiles were cold beneath me. I could hear Robert moving around downstairs, hear the television turn on, hear him opening the refrigerator. Normal sounds of a normal evening in our home, except nothing would ever be normal again. I kept reading, unable to stop, even though each message felt like a knife wound. There was Jessica in Portland, who thought Robert was divorced and planning to marry her. There was Amanda in San Francisco, who he'd been seeing for 7 years. 7 years. That's how long James had been in high school. Robert had been with her the entire time. There was Diane in Vancouver, who sent him explicit photos with messages about missing him. There was Lisa, who worked at his company, who he saw multiple times a week. And then there was Natalie. The messages with Natalie went back 12 years. 12 years. I did the math in my head. He'd started seeing her when Claire was in middle school, when I was still working full-time, when we were supposedly happy. The messages showed a fully developed relationship. They had pet names for each other. They celebrated anniversaries. She sent him photos of meals she'd cooked for him, of a cat they apparently shared, of a living room I didn't recognize. I found calendar entries on the phone. Dinner with N, weekend getaway with NN's birthday. These entries overlapped with times Robert told me he was traveling for work. That apartment in Bellevue? It had Natalie's name on the lease as co-tenant. They were living together. My husband had another home, another life, another complete relationship that had been running parallel to ours for over a decade. The financial records on the phone told another story. Robert had been supporting all these women financially. Cash payments to Jessica, rent for Natalie's apartment, the one they shared. Credit cards he'd opened in his name that were used by various women. Expensive gifts, jewelry, trips. I calculated quickly in my head. He was spending thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars a month on these other relationships. That's where our retirement money had gone. That's why our savings account was empty. He'd been draining our finances for years to fund his other lives. The nice house we lived in, the one I thought we owned outright. I pulled up email conversations about a second mortgage Robert had taken out without telling me. We were hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. I heard his footsteps on the stairs. "Maggie, you up here?" His voice was casual, normal. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My face was blotchy from crying. My hair was a mess. I looked exactly like what I was, a 55-year-old woman whose entire life had just exploded. "I'm in here," I called back, surprised my voice sounded steady. I unlocked the bathroom door. Robert was standing in the hallway in his usual evening outfit, comfortable jeans and a sweater. He looked concerned when he saw my face. "Are you okay? You look upset." He actually sounded worried. This man who'd been systematically lying to me for over a decade, who'd been living multiple lives, who'd stolen our future, was asking if I was okay. I held up the phone. I found this in your car. The transformation on his face was instant and terrible. The concern vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he tried to grab the phone from my hand. I stepped back into the bathroom. "Give me that," he said. Not an explanation. Not an apology. Just a command. "Who are these women, Robert?" My voice was shaking now. "Who is Natalie? Who is Jessica? Amanda? Diane? Lisa? How many are there?" He changed tactics, his face softening into something that might have been remorse if I didn't know better. "Maggie, let's talk about this calmly. It's not what you think." "It's not what I think?" I heard my voice rising. "I've been reading your messages for the past 2 hours. I know about Natalie, about the apartment in Bellevue. I know about the money. I know everything. You don't understand. These relationships, they don't mean anything. You're my wife. You're the one who matters." He was using his reasonable voice, his let's be logical voice. The same voice he'd used 100 times to explain away my suspicions. 12 years, I said. "You've been with Natalie for 12 years. You have an apartment together. You have a cat together. You're telling me that doesn't mean anything?" He moved closer, reaching for me. "Maggie, you're emotional right now. Let me explain. There are things you don't understand about my work, about the stress I'm under." I laughed. It came out harsh and broken. "Your work? Is that what we're calling this? Your work required you to have relationships with 5 different women? Your work required you to empty our retirement savings? Your work required you to take out a second mortgage on our house without telling me?" Something shifted in his expression. The mask dropped completely. "You went through the phone. You had no right to do that." "I had no right?" I was shouting now. "I'm your wife. We've been married for 24 years. I have every right. Those messages were private." He was angry now, genuinely angry, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "You violated my privacy." The absolute insanity of that statement took my breath away. I'd discovered he'd been living multiple secret lives, stealing from us, lying about everything, and he was angry at me for invading his privacy? "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" "Get out of this house. Right now. Get out. Maggie, you're being dramatic. This is my house too. We need to discuss this rationally." I started throwing things. His toiletries from the bathroom counter, his clothes from the closet, anything I could grab. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" I was screaming, crying, hurling his belongings down the stairs. Robert stood there looking shocked, like he couldn't believe I was capable of this kind of reaction. Like I was the one behaving badly. Finally, he held up his hands. "Fine, I'll give you space to calm down. But we're going to talk about this like adults." He left. I heard the front door close, heard his car start. I collapsed on the bedroom floor and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the bedroom floor with that phone, reading everything, taking screenshots with my own phone, documenting the evidence. Years of lies laid out in digital messages. Around 3 a.m, I started making a list. Every woman I could identify, every financial transaction I could find, every lie that now made sense. That conference in San Francisco when Claire was 5? He'd been with Amanda. The weekend retreat he said his company required? Weekend with Natalie in their Bellevue apartment. My 50th birthday when he claimed he had an emergency client meeting and missed my party. Dinner with Jessica in Portland. Every missed anniversary, every canceled vacation, every time he'd chosen his phone over our conversation. It all had names now. It all had faces. At dawn I called Patricia. She answered on the second ring, instantly alert despite the early hour. "Maggie, what's wrong?" I told her everything. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then she said, "I'm coming over. Don't move. Don't do anything. I'm bringing coffee and we're going to figure this out." She arrived 30 minutes later with 2 other women from book club, Linda and Susan. They'd been through divorces themselves. They knew what came next in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. Patricia took one look at me and pulled me into a hug. "First thing, we're calling a lawyer. Second thing, we're getting all these messages backed up properly. Third thing, you're not staying in this house alone." Linda was already on her phone, calling someone. "My divorce attorney. She's tough as nails, and she handles cases involving hidden assets." Susan was in the kitchen making real food, not just coffee. "You need to eat. You need to be sharp. This is going to be hard." The attorney, Michelle Chang, came to the house that afternoon. She looked at everything I'd found on the phone, asked pointed questions about our finances, took notes in a legal pad. "This is actually good," she said, which seemed insane to me. "Not good that it happened, but good that you have this documentation. Many spouses suspect affairs but can't prove them. You have everything. Messages, financial records, proof of hidden assets." She explained what would happen next. Filing for divorce, financial discovery, separating our assets, though from what she could see, there weren't many assets left to separate. The house had that secret second mortgage. Our retirement accounts had been depleted. Robert had been living far beyond his means, supporting multiple households. "Is there any chance he's been doing something illegal?" Michelle asked. "Money laundering? Fraud? Because the amounts you're describing don't add up with a normal tech consultant salary, even a good one." I hadn't even considered that. What if Robert's entire career was a lie, too? What if the business trips, the consulting work, all of it was cover for something else? That evening, Robert tried to come home. Patricia and Linda were still there. He knocked, then used his key when I didn't answer. He walked in to find 3 women staring at him. "I need to talk to my wife." "Alone," he said. "She doesn't want to talk to you," Patricia said. She'd positioned herself between Robert and me. "She's contacted an attorney. Any communication needs to go through them." Robert's face darkened. "This is my house. These are private matters. I need you all to leave." "Actually," Michelle had told me this part, "technically you need to leave. You've been asked to go. If you refuse, we can call the police and have you removed for trespassing." I watched him process this, watched him realize he wasn't in control anymore. "Maggie, please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. 24 years of marriage has to mean something." "It did mean something," I said. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. It meant I was faithful. I was honest. "I built a life with you while you were building 4 other lives with 4 other women. We're done, Robert." He tried several more tactics. Tears which looked fake. Anger, accusing my friends of poisoning me against him. Bargaining, promising he'd end all the affairs, go to therapy, be the husband I deserved. I just kept saying no, 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 no. Finally, he left. Michelle advised me to change the locks immediately. Men like this, when they lose control, they escalate. He might try to remove financial documents, valuable items. Protect yourself. The next few days were a blur of documentation and discovery. I went to the Bellevue apartment, the one Robert shared with Natalie. I'd found the address in his phone. I knocked on the door. A woman answered. She was younger than me, maybe mid-40s, pretty in a casual way. She looked confused when she saw me. "Are you Natalie?" I asked. Her face went white. "Oh my God, you're his wife." We stared at each other for a long moment. Then she stepped back. "You should come in." Natalie's living room had photos on the walls. Photos of her and Robert, on vacation, at restaurants, celebrating what looked like Christmas. There was a cat sleeping on the couch, an orange tabby. The apartment was decorated nicely, comfortable. This wasn't some secret love nest. This was a home. "How long have you known he was married?" I asked. She sat down heavily. "I've always known. He told me from the beginning. He said you two were staying together for the kids, that you had an arrangement, that you both dated other people. He said once the kids were grown, he'd leave you and we'd get married." "We don't have an arrangement," I said. "I thought we had a marriage. And he's not just seeing you. There are at least 4 other women that I know of." The color drained from her face completely. "What?" I showed her screenshots from the phone. She read them, her hands shaking. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know about the others. He told me I was the only one besides you. He said he loved me. We've been together for 12 years. I thought we were building a future. We talked for 2 hours. Natalie told me Robert had presented himself as a successful consultant trapped in a loveless marriage. He'd told her about his children, but claimed I was cold and distant, focused only on my career. He'd said we slept in separate bedrooms, barely spoke, stayed together only for financial reasons until the kids left home. None of it was true, but she'd believed him, just like I'd believed his lies about business trips. Before I left Natalie's apartment, she did something unexpected. She went to her bedroom and came back with a folder. "Financial documents," she said. "Robert had me co-sign on some accounts. I have statements, bank records. If you need them for your divorce, they're yours." She was helping me. This woman who'd been sleeping with my husband for 12 years was handing me ammunition for my divorce. We weren't friends, would never be friends, but in that moment we were allies against a common enemy. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Because I've wasted 12 years of my life on a lie. And if what you showed me is true, if there are really other women, then I'm done too." "He needs to face consequences," she paused. "I'm sorry. For my part in this, I believed him when he said you didn't care." I took the folder and left. In my car, I sat for a long time before driving home. The documents Natalie gave me revealed even more than I'd found on the phone. Joint bank accounts I didn't know about, investment accounts in Robert's name with Natalie as beneficiary, life insurance policies where she was listed as his spouse. His spouse. He'd committed insurance fraud, claiming to be unmarried or divorced when taking out these policies. That's what Michelle had suspected. Robert wasn't just having affairs. He was committing fraud, likely tax evasion, possibly embezzlement from his company to fund all of this. Over the next few weeks, more truths emerged. I contacted Jessica in Portland. She was shocked to learn about the others, but unlike Natalie, she was angry at me. "He said you were crazy, that you made his life miserable. He said you were the reason he needed escape." She hung up on me when I tried to explain. Amanda in San Francisco wouldn't talk to me at all. Diane in Vancouver sent me a vicious email calling me a jealous, desperate old woman who couldn't accept that her husband had moved on. Lisa from his company blocked my number. Not all the other women were victims. Some knew he was married and didn't care. Some believed his lies about me and chose to believe them even when confronted with evidence. It was complicated and painful in ways I hadn't expected. The divorce proceedings began. Robert hired an aggressive attorney and fought everything. He claimed the second phone wasn't his, that I'd planted evidence, that I was having a mental breakdown and fabricating elaborate fantasies. He told our children I'd lost my mind, that I was destroying the family over paranoid delusions. Claire didn't believe him. She came home from college the weekend after I filed for divorce. She'd seen too much over the years, heard too many of my concerns that her father had dismissed. When I showed her the evidence, she cried for hours, not for her father, but for me. For all the years I'd suffered while she'd been unable to help. James was different. He was angrier, more confused. His father was his hero. Robert had been to every baseball game, had coached his little league team, had been the dad who showed up. James didn't want to believe his father was capable of this level of deception. He stopped answering my calls for several weeks. The financial discovery in the divorce revealed the full extent of the damage. Robert had taken out not one but 3 mortgages on our house. Our retirement accounts were empty. He'd maxed out credit cards in both our names. We were over $600,000 in debt. The house we'd bought for $200,000 in the 1990s, now worth nearly $1 million, was mortgaged for more than its value. Michelle discovered Robert had also taken out loans using his company's name, personal guarantees that made him liable. His employer was investigating. There was a possibility of criminal charges. The perfect, respected consultant was about to lose everything. But so was I. The house would have to be sold. After paying off the mortgages and debts, there would be nothing left. My retirement savings were gone. I was 55 years old with no safety net, no financial security, no husband, no future I'd planned for. I spent nights lying awake doing calculations. My librarian pension would give me maybe $3,000 a month. I'd need to find a smaller apartment, one I could afford. I'd have to keep working, couldn't retire at 60 as I'd planned. Everything I'd worked for, saved for, built toward, was gone because my husband had been funding multiple lives. The court ordered Robert to provide financial disclosure. What came back was shocking even to Michelle. Robert's actual income wasn't anywhere near what he'd claimed. That successful consulting business. It existed, but he wasn't making the money he'd told me. He'd been supplementing his income by taking loans, opening credit cards, refinancing the house over and over. It was a house of cards that had finally collapsed, and I was collateral damage. The emotional toll was devastating. I took a leave of absence from the library. I couldn't focus, couldn't sleep, lost 20 pounds in 6 weeks. Dr. Chen, my therapist, saw me twice a week. "You're grieving," she told me. "Not just the end of your marriage, but the loss of the life you thought you had. That grief is real and valid." Patricia and the book club women became my lifeline. They brought me food, sat with me during the worst nights, accompanied me to court hearings. When James finally agreed to see me, Patricia drove me to the coffee shop where we met and waited in her car in case I needed her. James looked older when I saw him. The innocent joy I'd always loved in him was gone, replaced by something harder. "Dad says you're trying to take everything from him," he said. "That you hired a ruthless lawyer to destroy him." I showed him the documents. All of them. The messages, the financial records, the proof of the lies. I watched his face change as he read, watched him age another year in 30 minutes. When he finished, he was crying. I believed him. All those times you seemed upset about something and he said you were being paranoid, I believed him. "I'm so sorry, Mom." The divorce took 18 months to finalize. 18 months of depositions, court hearings, financial forensics. Michelle had to hire a forensic accountant to trace all of Robert's hidden transactions. What they found was staggering. Robert had been running this scheme for nearly 15 years, not just 12. The debt went back further than even Natalie knew. Robert's attorney tried every tactic to paint me as the unreasonable party. They claimed I'd refused marriage counseling, refused to work on our relationship, that I was vindictive and cruel. In one deposition, Robert actually cried, saying he'd made mistakes, but I was destroying him out of spite. I sat across from him in that conference room, watching this performance, and felt nothing. The man I'd loved was gone, if he'd ever really existed. The turning point came when Robert's employer discovered the extent of his fraud. He'd been falsifying expense reports for years, billing personal expenses as business costs. The apartment with Natalie, trips with other women, gifts, all charged to company credit cards as client entertainment. His company terminated him and filed charges. Suddenly, Robert had bigger problems than our divorce. Without his income, he couldn't keep up the payments on anything. The apartment in Bellevue went into foreclosure. Natalie moved out, sent me one last text saying she was sorry and wished me well. The other women disappeared from his life. When the money stopped, so did they. The house sale was brutal. We'd lived there for 23 years. I walked through empty rooms, remembering Claire learning to walk in the living room, James's birthday parties in the backyard, holiday dinners, ordinary Tuesday evenings. All those memories now tainted by the knowledge that Robert had been living other lives during all of it. After paying off the mortgages and debts, we each walked away with about $30,000. That was it. 24 years of marriage, and I got enough for a security deposit and a few months' rent. Claire helped me find a small one-bedroom apartment in Fremont. It was a third the size of the house, with thin walls and dated appliances. But it was mine. No memories of Robert, no ghosts of lies. I moved in with the furniture that Claire and James insisted I take. Some books, my clothes. Starting over at 56 felt both terrifying and strangely liberating. The criminal charges against Robert moved slowly through the system. Michelle kept me updated, though I told her I didn't need to know. I wasn't invested in his punishment anymore. I just wanted to be free of him. Eventually, he took a plea deal. 3 years probation, restitution payments, community service. He avoided prison, but his career was over. No company would hire him after what came out in the investigation. I heard through Claire that Robert moved to Spokane, living with a sister I'd met maybe twice in our entire marriage. He was working at a hardware store, barely making ends meet. The man who'd lived like a millionaire on stolen money and credit was now struggling to pay rent on a studio apartment. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, satisfied that he'd faced consequences. But mostly I just felt tired. All that anger and hurt had burned itself out. What remained was just sadness for the waste of it all. The years I'd lost, the security I'd sacrificed, the innocence my children had been stripped of. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday, appropriately enough. The same day of the week I'd found that phone. Michelle called me with the news. "It's done. You're officially divorced. And Maggie, I know this has been hell, but you made it through." That takes incredible strength. I hung up and sat in my small apartment, my cat Pepper curled on my lap. I'd adopted her from the shelter where I volunteered. She was older, like me, overlooked by people who wanted kittens. We were a good match. I looked around at my modest space, thought about my modest pension, my modest future, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The financial situation stabilized slowly. I went back to work at the library part-time. My pension covered rent and basics. I budgeted carefully, learned to live on much less than I had before. Some months were tight, but I was managing. More importantly, I was rebuilding relationships. Claire and I talked every week. She'd graduated and started a job in Portland, doing well, dating someone she really liked. She asked my advice about relationships now, and I gave it honestly. Trust your instincts, I told her. If something feels wrong, don't talk yourself out of that feeling. Don't do what I did. James took longer to process everything. His relationship with Robert was strained now. Surface-level conversations about sports and weather, but nothing deeper. He came to Seattle to visit me every few months. We were learning to be honest with each other in ways we never had been before. One afternoon during a visit, James asked me something I'd been dreading. Mom, do you regret marrying Dad? Do you wish you'd never met him? I thought about it carefully. I don't regret your existence or your sister's. You two are the best things that came from that marriage. But do I regret the years of lies? The financial devastation? The emotional abuse? Yes, I regret not seeing it sooner. I regret not trusting myself sooner. Would you ever date again? He asked. The question surprised me. I was 57 now. The idea of dating, of trusting another man, seemed impossible. I don't know, I admitted. Right now, I'm learning how to trust myself again. Maybe that's enough. The first year after the divorce was about survival. Paying bills, showing up to work, getting through each day. But somewhere around my 58th birthday, something shifted. I woke up one morning and realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actually living. The volunteer work at the animal shelter became more than just something to fill time. I started fostering dogs, helping rehabilitate the ones that had been neglected or abused. There was something healing about helping these broken creatures learn to trust again. We were doing it together, me and these damaged dogs, all of us learning that not everyone would hurt us. Through the shelter, I met other volunteers. Real friendships formed, not the careful social friendships of my marriage, where I'd always been performing the role of happy wife. These people knew my story. I didn't have to pretend with them. Maria, who ran the shelter, had been through her own devastating divorce. We'd have coffee after shifts and talk honestly about rebuilding lives. I started taking classes at the community center, watercolor painting on Tuesday evenings. I was terrible at it, but that wasn't the point. For years, everything I did had to have a purpose, had to be practical, had to contribute to maintaining the perfect household. Painting badly, just for the joy of it, felt revolutionary. The library became a sanctuary again, not a job I had to perform. I loved helping patrons find books, loved the quiet rhythm of cataloging, loved being surrounded by stories. Some of my coworkers knew about the divorce, but many didn't. At work, I was just Maggie the librarian, not Maggie the woman whose husband destroyed her life. My relationship with my body changed too. For decades, I'd viewed myself through what I imagined was Robert's judgment. Was I thin enough, young enough, attractive enough? Now at 58, I looked in the mirror and saw a survivor. The gray hair I'd been dyeing for years, I let grow in naturally. The wrinkles around my eyes, I earned them. This body had carried 2 children, worked for 30 years, survived devastation. It deserved respect, not criticism. Dr. Chen helped me process the deeper wounds. You spent 24 years having your reality denied, she explained. Robert gaslit you constantly. You learned not to trust your own perceptions. Healing means reclaiming your ability to know what's true. I started keeping a journal, writing down my thoughts and feelings without second-guessing them. If I felt something, it was valid. If I perceived something, it was real. I didn't need anyone else to confirm my reality anymore. Claire came to visit for Thanksgiving that year. She was engaged now and wanted me to meet her fiancé, Tom. I was nervous, protective. Would I see red flags in their relationship that she couldn't see? Would my trauma make me overly suspicious? But watching them together eased my fears. Tom listened when Claire spoke. He asked her opinions on decisions. When they disagreed about something minor, they talked it through with respect. He's good to you? I asked Claire when we had a moment alone. He's good to me, Mom, and I know what to look for now. I watched what happened with you and Dad. I know the difference between love and control. She hugged me. Thank you for showing me what not to accept. James had started therapy himself, processing his own feelings about Robert's betrayal. He called me one evening and said something that made me cry. I used to think Dad was the example of what a man should be. Strong, successful, in control. Now I realize he was just broken and cruel. I don't want to be like him. I'm trying to figure out what kind of man I actually want to be. My small apartment became a home. I hung art on the walls, plants in the windows, photos of my children and my foster dogs. It wasn't impressive or expensive, but it was honest. Everything in it was something I'd chosen, not something Robert approved of or purchased to maintain an image. Money was still tight, but I'd learned to find joy in small things. Library book sales, where hardcovers cost $1. Free concerts in the park. Walks along the Burke-Gilman Trail with Pepper. Coffee with friends. The kinds of pleasures that don't cost much but feed the soul. I even started dating, though that word felt strange at 59. A man named David from the watercolor class asked me to dinner. I said yes, then panicked for 3 days. What if I couldn't trust my judgment? What if I chose another Robert? But David wasn't Robert. He was a retired teacher, widowed for 5 years, learning to paint because his late wife had always wanted him to try it. On our first date, he asked about my life, really listened to the answers, shared honestly about his own grief and healing. There was no performance, no trying to impress. Just two older people being real with each other. We dated casually for several months. Nothing serious, just companionship and conversation. He never pressured me for more than I was ready to give. When I told him about Robert, about the betrayal and the financial devastation, he didn't try to fix it or minimize it. He just said, "That must have been terrible. I'm sorry that happened to you." Simple acknowledgement. Simple respect. It felt like water after years in a desert. Not everything was healed. I still had moments of panic when I saw charges on my credit card I didn't immediately recognize. I still felt a flutter of anxiety when someone asked where I was or what I was doing, before remembering I didn't need permission or approval anymore. I still sometimes woke from dreams where I was back in the Ballard house, searching for that second phone, finding more and more evidence of lives I knew nothing about. But those moments came less frequently now, and when they did come, I had tools to handle them. Therapy, friends, my journal. The knowledge that I'd survived the worst and was still standing. On my 60th birthday, my children threw me a small party at my apartment. Just them, their partners, a few close friends. We ate cake from the grocery store bakery and drank cheap wine and laughed until my neighbors probably complained. Claire gave a toast that made everyone cry. To my mom, who taught me that it's never too late to choose yourself. Today, I'm 60 years old. And I'm sitting in my small Fremont apartment with Pepper curled up beside me, looking out at the Seattle rain, and I can honestly say I'm happy. Not the performance of happiness I maintained for 24 years. Real happiness, the quiet, solid kind that comes from living authentically. 5 years have passed since I found that phone. 5 years since my world exploded and I had to rebuild from nothing. People ask me sometimes if I regret those 24 years with Robert, if I feel like I wasted my life. The answer is complicated. Do I regret the lies, the betrayal, the financial devastation? Absolutely. But those years also gave me Claire and James, taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way, and ultimately led me to this version of myself that I actually like. I retired from the library last year. My pension isn't much, but combined with careful budgeting and the part-time work I do at the animal shelter, I manage. I'm not wealthy. I'll never have the financial security I thought I was building during my marriage. But I have enough. And I've learned that enough is actually quite a lot when you're living honestly. My relationship with my children has deepened in ways that wouldn't have been possible in my old life. Claire got married last summer in a small ceremony in Portland. When she asked me to help her get ready, we talked about relationships, about red flags, about the importance of maintaining your own identity. She thanked me for showing her what strength looks like. Not the fake strength of holding everything together no matter the cost, but the real strength of knowing when to walk away. James is engaged now too, to a wonderful woman named Sarah who doesn't take any of his nonsense. He told me recently that therapy helped him understand he'd been modeling his behavior after Robert's controlling tendencies. "I almost destroyed my relationship the same way Dad destroyed yours," he said. But Sarah called me out, and I actually listened. I got help. I'm learning to be different. The fact that my pain led to their growth doesn't make the pain worthwhile, but it does give it meaning. My children are building healthier relationships because they witnessed my unhealthy one. They're asking for what they need because they saw me spend decades never asking. They're trusting their instincts because they saw the cost of ignoring mine. David and I are still seeing each other. It's been over a year now. We're taking it slow, both of us cautious from our past experiences. He knows everything about Robert, and I know everything about his late wife and the grief he still carries. We're two people who've lived full, complicated lives, learning to be together without losing ourselves. There's no drama, no intensity, no grand romantic gestures. Just steady, honest companionship. At 60, that's exactly what I want. I still volunteer at the shelter 3 days a week. Last month, I fostered a dog named Charlie, who'd been so badly abused he wouldn't let anyone touch him. It took weeks of patient work, sitting near him without expectations, letting him approach me on his own terms. The day he finally rested his head on my lap, I cried. We were healing each other, Charlie and me. Sometimes I see Robert's name in my email inbox. He tries to reach out occasionally, emails that start with apologies and end with requests for money or help. I delete them without reading past the first line. That part of my life is closed. I don't wish him harm, but I don't wish him anything. He's simply irrelevant to my life now. What I want you to understand, if you're watching this and seeing yourself in my story, is that it's never too late. I know how that sounds. I know when you're 55 or 60 or any age and your entire foundation has crumbled, starting over feels impossible. But I'm living proof that it's not. Will your rebuilt life look like the one you planned? No, my life now is smaller in many ways than the one I had. Smaller apartment, smaller budget, smaller social circle, but it's bigger in the ways that matter. Bigger in authenticity, in peace, in genuine connection, in self-respect. If you're in a relationship where you constantly doubt yourself, where your partner makes you feel crazy for trusting your instincts, where financial control keeps you trapped, where you're performing happiness instead of feeling it, please listen to that voice inside you that knows something is wrong. That voice is right. It's always been right. I wasted years ignoring my intuition because I was afraid of what the truth would cost me. And yes, the truth did cost me everything. But what I gained was worth more than what I lost. I gained myself back. You might be thinking, but I'm too old to start over. I'm 60, 70, 50. I don't have time to rebuild. Let me tell you something. I started over at 55 with $30,000 and a pension. I'm 60 now, and I have a life I love. You have time. You have more time than you think. And if you're worried about being alone, about whether you can manage financially, about what people will think, remember this. I was more alone in my marriage than I've ever been in my small apartment. The financial security I thought I had was an illusion, and the people who matter have respected my choice. The ones who didn't weren't people I needed in my life anyway. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you something. If you found this helpful, if my experience resonated with you or helped you understand your own situation better, please leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you're struggling with a decision to stay or go. You don't have to share details, just let me know you're there. Sometimes knowing we're not alone is the first step toward change. And please subscribe to this channel. Every week I'll be sharing more stories of women who've survived, who've rebuilt, who've found themselves again after loss. We're creating a community here, a place where the truth is spoken and survival is celebrated. If you're in a crisis, if you're afraid, please reach out to domestic violence organizations, to therapists, to trusted friends. You don't have to figure this out alone. There are people who understand, who can help, who will believe you. I'm sitting here 5 years later, in my modest apartment with my rescue cat, watching the rain, planning to meet David for coffee later, looking forward to seeing my grandchildren next month. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, choosing yourself is never the wrong choice. It might be the hardest choice. It might cost you everything you thought mattered. But what you gain, the peace and authenticity and self-respect, is worth more than anything you'll lose. Your story doesn't have to end the way mine began. It can end the way mine is continuing, with peace, with truth, with a small life that's entirely your own. That's not failure, that's victory.